You're good to go.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Pwning Noobs Dispelling Video Game Stereotypes panel, led by me, Banjo. And what a wonderful day it is. I wouldn't know because, gamers don't go outside. Just kidding. But what we're here to do today is to dispel this notion, right? This thing that this air amongst like the culture of video games that is usually negative, but we're gonna go through a journey, right? An insight as to what the culture of video games is, and we're gonna dispel some of these awful stereotypes. I'm Banjo, and if you haven't known by my name, my favorite game is actually Guitar Hero. So with me is some very, very informed people in the industry who will be helping us go through this wonderful journey of exploration. Two words that mean the same thing. Anyway, so we have Tony Madrano, the executive creative director at 6 Foot. We have Renee Blair, the technical game designer at Guerrilla Games. And if you guys don't know what Guerrilla Games is, it's they made not only the best game for the PS3, Killzone 2, but also the best game for the PS4, Horizon Zero Dawn. We have Miss Myra Byram, the director of Esports operations at Mainline.gg here in Houston, Texas. We have Mr. Rick Arpin, the office managing partner at KPMG in Las Vegas. And rounding us off, we have Mr. Justin Pelt, the Assistant Director of Esports at the University of St. Thomas. Thank you guys so much for joining me today.
Appreciate you, T. Thanks for hosting, man.
Yeah, thanks for hosting.
So, dispelling video game stereotypes, right? There's a lot of like weird things that kind of involve our video game culture, right? I shouldn't say weird. I should say things that really a lot of people have different misconceptions about, right? A lot of us aren't like weirdos playing video games in our basement. I wish. But, what does it mean to you to dispel the stereotype? Because I feel like we've all experienced it at some point. So starting us off, right, what does it mean to dispel a stereotype of video gaming? Like, what is that to you guys?
To me, I think I kind of see it as, something that I think when people put you in a box when they hear something or when you're associated with something, right, and not actually giving you or a person or that thing the ability to sort of like or enjoy something but be your own sort of person, right? So I see this, to me at least, dispelling a stereotype is opening people's eyes to see, oh, just because you're associated with something doesn't mean you're all the qualities that people assume, right? Like, you can be your own individual person and everything you bring to the table without having to embody the qualities of something that people traditionally see. So that's at least what it means to me, and that's what I hope from this conversation, at least in regards to gaming, specifically as it pertains to me at the collegiate level, that people, kind of drop the stereotypes that they have of gamers and especially gamers from the 18 to 21 year old range and see them as this new generation of gamers, if you will, for who they are.
I think with dispelling stereotypes, particularly about gaming and gamers, it's just sort of talking about how stereotypes are something that people don't innately know or something like that, but it's a learned thing. So for example, I was thinking about when I was a little kid and first experienced games, I thought they were marketed towards girls because it was I thought Pokemon, Sonic, Zelda, these were cute. And Tomb Raider, I played as a girl, I am a girl, so clearly it's for me. And then I only learned that the marketing was not for me as I got older. And as I started talking to peers, and peers were the ones who were saying things that made me feel weird and insecure about the games I played and made. So it's just and also that kind of, I feel made it more difficult for me to enter the industry as I was in college and didn't know what to look for and didn't know how to articulate my career goals. So it's just talking about how, once again, stereotypes, they're learned, they're not innate, and how They make people feel insecure about harmless hobbies. They make people question good, like what could be a great career, that sort of thing.
Right.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Renee, and I think it's almost like the stereotype acts as the gate for
Yes.
everything, right? And so as long as you understand that the stereotype itself is the gatekeeping mechanism for you being yourself, other people doing whatever the hell they want, it's real easy to be like, oh, that makes no sense. So we can kind of topple it over. But I think speaking personally, like there's so many things that you also hold to be like the standard. This is what it's supposed to be or whatever. So it's important to even be aware of those things as well and just see what are you kind of thinking is a stereotype that maybe isn't, that could be freeing for yourself or for others. All in all, though, it's about knocking down those gates and knocking down those walls.
Right. So like I feel like because like piggybacking off what you and Renee agreed to is like, it's a learned thing. Like stereotypes is definitely a learned thing, right? So like we've all experienced it at one point, right? Like when I was growing up, I felt like, everybody was like inclined, just because, I grew up like around a bunch of black kids that, playing stuff like, that if I didn't play Madden, right, or if I didn't play 2K, it was like, what? You're really playing like Mario 64 or you're not playing Dev Jam or you're not playing a new game by 50 Cent? Like, like stereotyping is definitely the gate. And like, it's learned. And if we can learn it, then we can most certainly like unlearn it, like think like video games have been around for a long time. So like as like video games grow and as they like evolve, the community and the culture behind those things, it has to evolve with it. It's very important that happens, because the world as it should be, it's, or culture as it should be, it's just way more tolerant now. It's, it's like we have a bunch of like, cultures and subcultures that are accepted widely by everybody. And this is, and video games, usually like it's not the case. So, it's on us to make sure that we kind of just like figure that out, in my opinion. So,
Yeah, and Banjo, you got a big demographic shift and trends that have been happening, right? And you see that in other
yeah,
other areas of life, like you just mentioned. You see it culturally, you see it you see it in the tech industry, you see it in video games, right? We're all close to it, but for the people that aren't close to it, if you're in an older demographic, it's just it's foreign to you because you didn't grow up with it. You maybe haven't even, if you're old enough, if you're a baby boomer, even your kids maybe weren't that exposed to it. But now you got two full generations of millennials and Gen Z who are basically native to gaming. And they're the dominant generational forces now and going forward. And so they're gonna push it out. They're gonna push it upward. The way our grandmas use their cell phones now, like we never thought they would. They'll understand video games better in the future too, right?
right.
So these things will happen, but also it also is incumbent upon the community and the stakeholders in this community to help educate and push that change too.
Yeah, Rick, that's a great point, actually. So, as you mentioned, people are just becoming familiar with their screens, and it's becoming part of their day to day. Like you said, your grandma can text with you now. And it used to be that community building was based around sports or other forms of entertainment that were in person. But now we're community building through technology and gaming. And that's a great way to look at it, is that with societal changes, the norms are going to change. And as gaming being such a wonderful way to make those connections is shifting, the stereotypes around it need to dissolve, because it is gatekeeping a huge group of people outside of it unnecessarily. And it's hurting the goal, which is community building and entertainment and connections. Just kind of like Renee mentioned, growing up, I have an older brother, and he was like the gamer in the household, and he was kind of deemed, it was approved by my parents that he played games. but I didn't even consider it really. Playing games, I watched him play, but I didn't play myself until I was on my own in my 20s and had moved out. It's like, wait a minute, no, I can just buy a PC and play games. It doesn't matter who I am. And at the end of the day, it comes down to,
Right.
if you play games, you're a gamer. And that's about as far
Yes.
as that stereotype goes.
Yeah, because I feel like, what I'm saying, like, we're all a part of this one thing, right? And like it's a lot, it's like on brand with like with Nike saying like if you're a body, you're an athlete. If you have a body, you're an athlete. Well, you know what I mean, if you play video games, by definition, it's in the name, you're a gamer. And it's just like there's nothing you can do about that. So be with us, be in this thing together with us. Cause like like I guess like if there was a positive like stereotype to like take from this so far, it's like, okay, then I mean, you a nerd and being a nerd is kind of great, to be honest with you. Like I love being a nerd. Like having like geeky stuff on like just on my walls and having wall scrolls and being involved with anime and video games and things like that. It's just I love it. So but like this negative stereotype, right? It's been around for like a while, like, and it's like why is this like a thing? Like why does this keep persisting? Like it's gotten better somewhat in the past couple of years, but like if you were toxic in like a Call of Duty chat, or you're toxic in a League of Legends chat, then people would just be like, oh well, this is standard, you know playing until like you're red in the face is like this is normal, and you're like screaming at your monitor is normal. So it's just like why does a thing like this like persist? Why does this keep going?
Well, mute button got me. But yeah, T, I think a point you were getting at, and I think is important to that I want to bring up, is I think what video games transcends, right? And I think the most unfortunate thing about the stereotype, or one of the more unfortunate things in my opinion, is that like kind of like I mentioned at the top of this call, is that it's almost like people use the stereotype of video gamers to put us in a bucket instead of looking at it as a way that transcends different kinds of people and brings them together under one banner, right?
Yeah.
For example, like look at all of us just in this call today, right? Like if you just looked at us, we all come from different backgrounds, we all have different jobs, and even in esports, we all have a different focus in esports, right? You have Renee and Tony who are on the production side of things. You have Myra or I'm sorry, on the development side. You have Myra who's on the production. I'm on like the collegiate administration, and yet here we are all together as just collective gamers, right? And so I think that if there's one general way that I hope that we could start changing the narrative, it's that wow, it's so cool that you and I are both gamers because it brought us together, as opposed to everyone looking at it and be like, oh, you play video games and you must just be, you know, a nerd, or, not social, or, all those negative things that people instantly think of. So that's a shift that I think you were alluding to, T, that I just want to bring light to, is the fact that, I hope that we can, us as representatives of the community, start to push the narrative of like, yeah, no, like, please don't put us in a box. In fact, I love like the family I'm able to make through gaming, and the different people and backgrounds I'm able to meet.
Right. So like I feel that like, well, we'll touch on like the whole like cultural shift like a little later. But you know, like touching on like, the real like negative aspects of stereotypes. One thing that's like a common thread of like, of why video games are bad is like the violence aspect, right? Because there's this big, there's always been this like back of the mind thing that like video games are just straight up violent, and video games are like, now whether they make violent people, I don't think that's a conversation, well maybe it is, but like I feel that like this is kind of inaccurate, because like video games are like, you know, they tell stories. They're not just something that like, you know, you can just jump in like, hey, you can just repeatedly like punch this guy for no reason type deal. You know what I'm saying? So it's kind of damaging, like that stereotype in particular, like violence in video games. And I feel like that's and I feel like in a medium like this, like video games, it's like you can't like say like, oh, this is violent, you know what I'm saying, without saying like, you know, a sport is violent or a movie is violent, right?
Yeah, I think context is really important to kind of what you're saying, right? Like you can't take one slice out of something and say, "Look at this. This is the worst thing ever."
Yes.
You got to kind of taste the whole cake to know what it all is. And I think that while there definitely are games, especially competitive games, that are more on the violent side, right? I think that there's been lots of studies to show that that doesn't translate over. But I think even more importantly, it's like Homer's The Odyssey is violent. You know, that's not new. That's old. And so conflict and those aspects are part of plenty of different mediums. I think the problem stems from when we disconnect kind of people to each other and there's no context around any of that, right? Two people playing football could be seen as violent. They're playing a sport. They're not actually trying to kill each other. Oh, okay, right? Like it sounds insane to have to spell it out that way, but that you know, that kind of what would you say, literacy for the medium
Yeah.
isn't quite there, and that's totally fine. That's nobody's one person's fault. I think it's just as new things come about, there's new stereotypes, new ways, new manners, new ways of being that were cool before that aren't cool now, and I think that's going to evolve. So I think the more important thing is to focus on, is this experience, whatever you're doing, whether it be watching movies, playing sports, taking you away from people or connecting you to people? Is it making you think of them as one-dimensional things or multi-dimensional things, right? Like I think
Yeah.
that's the really important part, because as soon as you start going down that lane, you're in trouble for sure. But I don't think that's due to the medium.
Yeah, kind of jump, or I guess elaborating off of that point, I think with violent video games and that sort of that sort of being an issue, I think that stems from, like you were saying, media literacy. So, for example, I was thinking about how, like, if we're talking about like in the 90s, 80s and 90s, like a lot of media it was meant to be summer blockbusters, just popcorn flicks, syndicated episodic things that don't really build off of each other on TV or TV shows. And like now, cartoons, like there's a whole plot through them usually. Comics, now people discuss them seriously. Movies, they're supposed to be more thought-provoking, even the action ones. So it's like people, like just growing up in the 90s and early 2000s, like the whole idea of media literacy and critically thinking about your media is new, and it's new that it's something that you're encouraged to be doing. So it's just people kind of ramping up on that. And part of that, and like to have games be beneficial and be able to think about them critically, is also building up your emotional intelligence. And like parents with kids who are discovering games, starting to have those conversations about emotional intelligence. So just like parents don't necessarily need to be a gamer, but just like sitting down with your kid and saying like, how'd your session go? Like, how do you feel about this game? What does this game make you feel? You know, just sort of like the questions that you would ask after leaving the movie theater are maybe the sort of questions you could ask after leaving a couple-hour gameplay session. You know, I feel like it's that simple, but it doesn't come naturally to people, and it hasn't been encouraged or discussed before.
Like, and I feel like it should start, because like no one is like, wow, like nobody has ever like sat down after I'm done with like Apex Legends and been like, well, how'd you feel about playing Apex Legends tonight? How'd you feel about it? Like no one's ever asked me that before. Like, and I feel
Was it fun?
Yeah, like for real, like, and it's just like through like even like if I would like go see a movie or something, like rarely do I like ever like talk about the movie after. I just let it like marinate in my head. But like when it comes to like video games, you know, so sure you would write about it on Twitter, you know, like, oh my God, the game is so great, I'd recommend it to anybody. But so rare has someone come up and ask you about an experience like after you like personally came up to you and asked you about the experience like after you did it. And I feel like, yeah, we should definitely start doing that, like 100%. Because then you can assess like, you know, whether you really want to like, you know, be involved with the game or not, or whether you want to like, you know, or whether you're playing it for the right reasons. I think that's super, super important.
And part of it, Banjo, the industry probably is just in general, or the community as well, just need to do probably a little more in that regard, right? Like the efforts from publishers or you know, producers, et cetera, to keep educating folks about what the games are, you know, the variety of games that exist, right, that aren't all violent. I mean, I think the idea, it was great when, you know, Renee first mentioned this in just us discussing this conference before we even got here. I'd really never contemplated, you know, that parent to child conversation about video games, and yet it is pretty natural in other forms, right? After school, what'd you learn today? How was it?
Yeah.
After the soccer practice, you know, you seem to really not like, you know, Joey. You know, why did you hit Joey in the stomach? What were you thinking when you hit Joey in the stomach, right? Like, you know, we have these conversations with kids, and then it's like, yeah, you're right. Video games like, hey, get out of your room, it's time for dinner, you know, or whatever, right? Like, so it's just, but it's on us to help educate people. You know, what is that like? What should that conversation be like, and what kinds of things can they be learning and absorbing, including emotional intelligence and relating to others. So kind of on us to carry that torch.
Yeah, and I mean, there have been some studies out there that kids who play a variety of types of games and play games with their parents and have parents who are gamers, like those are the kids who have higher moral reasoning, like improved executive function, improved relationships with their parents. So it's all about just talking about it and just like seeing how you feel and seeing what are the variety of games out there and hopefully playing them together.
Yeah, I feel like you know what I'm saying, like for violence in video games, like I feel like it's just like a part of this, like it's just a part of a bigger thing when it's like in video games. It's not just that thing. Touching on a little bit what Tony said earlier, it's not just that thing, right? So I feel like, you know, it's looked at wrong, like, but from a glance, I totally get like how that mission in Modern Warfare 2, No Russian, where you like gun down people in an airport. Like I get like from a glance, like how that could be perceived as like, you know, terrible, or how light gun games and gun peripherals were like a really sensitive thing, like back in the 90s, especially with, you know, with Columbine happening and things like that. And then games like Grand Theft Auto exist, and you know, like Modern Warfare, Call of Duty is still a thing, and like even like games that are like highly lauded, like The Last of Us 2, are just like extremely violent. But it's just like, you know, you can't put it in a box, right? This is way more than what it seems, and I think that's something that, you know, we should like talk about more. Well, not that, but just talk about your like experiences in general, because that's how, because getting it from the top is how we fix it, right? Because once you like fix it from the top, it like trickles down.
And I believe that it stems from, you know, a place of people no longer having depth. I mean, you think about what a stereotype is, and it's obviously just a way to categorize people, and it's something that we humans tend to do just to make things make sense in our brains. Um, but even when we talk about a positive stereotype of gamers, like you lovingly mentioned earlier, banjo nerds, most of us wear that flag and we're happy about it. But even assigning a positive stereotype to a gamer can be exclusive unintentionally. It can make you feel, oh, I'm not much of a nerd. Oh, I don't love the statistics or the lore. I just like playing games. So even these positive stereotypes can unintentionally gatekeep. You know, you start to use the stereotype itself will erase the distinction of individuals, and just kind of clump them in, and they are no longer humans. They're just a, you know, description of what a human could be. Um, And having it be so superficial, that's when it gets scary. That's when you start talking about people dehumanizing others. And that's when you kind of see that toxicity grow. As you'd mentioned, COD lobbies, which may be one of the worst out there. These kids are familiar with, they're expected to join this lobby and scream obscenities and hateful messages to the other kids in that lobby. So the stereotype has beget this stereotype of it's okay, I'm supposed to act out. And
Right. And like I'm not gonna lie, like, like a lot of kids in my like age group, like especially like in the early 2000s, like especially like just those Xbox Live days in general, it was just like really, really like bad. It was like it was just something that you're absolutely right, Myra. It was absolutely just like expected, but like, why? You know what I mean? Why are we really doing this? Like some of us thought it was funny, some of us just thought like, you know what I'm saying, like this is just the standard, but it's just like this is something that can't persist. Like, and as over the years it's gotten just better about like, we need to be able that we need to make sure that we can help protect women and people of color and the differently able, especially in video games, because now it's like, because now that that's gestated, it's like gone to a new level to where like, people are getting like bullied on Twitch and things like that. Like people are getting like talked about on Twitch about like, like if they're a girl, especially if they're a girl, especially if they're people of color, and especially if they're LBGTQ. So like, is there a cultural shift taking place?
I mean, I would say so at a larger level, but I don't think that necessarily one medium is going to drive it all. It's all people, and all these mediums are expressions of those people in one way, shape, or form. I think what's cool about video games is that maybe before I, you only had that lobby to play in, or you only had that one game to play, or that one community. But now there's so many diverse, completely different types of experiences that you can have with other communities as well. So you don't even have to find your nook and cranny and be by yourself. You can find your community and be your whole self. And I think that that's probably the better answer to what a lot of the stuff that you're talking about is, because I don't know if there's going to be a video game police that starts roaming around and regulating. I don't think that's going to work. I think it's got to be an expression from both the people in the industry, the fans. They're all kind of maturing and growing in real time. So I don't expect perfection, but I do hope that we keep going for diversity and like of experiences of different kinds of people, different kinds of games. That's the stuff that I think is going to move probably the ball forward more than most anything.
Cool. Because like, in regards to like policing like the industry, like Twitch tried that, you know. Twitch tried like multiple times to where there was just like, okay, well, since y'all said this, we just gonna like ban y'all in general. And it's just like, oh well, I mean, that's kind of taken out of context, but like, are you really gonna keep doing this with everybody? And like by like getting people involved and like making sure that, you know, how they get involved is genuine, it makes for a more, a realer response. Because like you said, it's not like you don't expect everybody to be perfect, but at least try. That would be really great. And you know we got to rectify this trend of dehumanization, because it's been a thing for like years. So we need more connection. I feel like we're doing our part in that, like a Discord call. Like I feel, or Discord in general. I feel like, especially during the pandemic, it's been like a really cool thing to have Discord, because I really feel like that medium in itself kind of brings us together. So like, what are games doing to bring us together?
I think during the pandemic, like people have been seeing games more as something equivalent to like board game night. So it's more like, sure, there's like playing the more like hardcore and competitive games, but there's also just relaxing, playing some Jackbox with friends, or there's like Phasmophobia, Among Us, Animal Crossing, just all these opportunities just kind of hang out inside a game. And so it's like that kind of is happening right now. And I think one of the broader things that's happening with games, and compared to in the past, is that it's like now in general, technology is more accessible to more different sorts of people all around the world. I mean, in the before, like say in the 90s and 2000s, like we were talking about, where a lot of these sort of negative behaviors and stereotypes started fomenting. That's when it was like technology and games were more the realm of people who are middle class, upper middle class. Those are the people who could afford them, who could afford the hobby. But now it's like you have free or very cheap or game bundles that are accessible on PC, on mobile, and not just on expensive one-use consoles. There's more indie and mid-range game marketplaces, so there's more different voices. And like you were saying earlier, more communities to join in, more people to relate to and talk to. So I think like those are the things. It's just now, like, I guess like more right now thinking about it as board game night, and a bigger general change of this being more accessible to more people means there's more places to find your niche and to find your community.
Yeah, I remember I was talking to Rick, and Rick, you mentioned that you see a lot of community like type stuff over there at the MGM, right? Over there in Vegas.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of competitive gaming is driven maybe at the highest level by sort of the esports that folks at least are getting exposed to with the various leagues and competitions that happen that are maybe large and in person. I think is a good thing because it starts to break down some of the walls, right? I mean, if you think about I still always think of it from like a parent-child like relationship. So video games like were very different for parents because they're like, hey, I used to grow up outdoors, you're growing up indoors. I grew up with the other kids, you're playing the games by yourself. I played this game, football, baseball, whatever. You're playing a game I don't understand, right? Call of Duty or whatever. So there, it's just totally unfamiliar, right? So the more familiarity you can bring, the better. Well, all of a sudden, now we can connect playing video games. You're not just playing alone, right? You're playing with groups of friends and maybe in a team or whatever, and that's more relatable, right?
Yeah.
And you're competing in something. Okay, I get the idea of competition. Like I have a young daughter, and I don't know what she'll like when she grows up. She may like sports, she may like other stuff, whatever it is. But let's say she likes competitive cheerleading. Like, I don't know anything about competitive cheerleading. I know about baseball, football, and other stuff, right? But those dads, when they got a girl in some sport that they never heard of, like they become the expert, right? So they'll get into it if their kids are into it, right? But there
Right.
has to be the level of familiarity is like, oh, I see, you're trying to get a higher score than them. Okay, cool. I'm in now, right? I'm yelling from the bleachers. I'm whatever. And so that idea of competitive gaming, I think, is a huge piece, along with, like I said, the technology to allow us to connect, and then again, some of these events now in person in a big arena. All of a sudden, I'm like, oh, I can relate to that. I mean, I don't know what you're doing at the center of the arena, but I get it that if 15,000 people are watching a competition, there's something going on, right? So
Right.
all this stuff adds up to help us get more exposure to the core, to a broader base of people, and get them more engaged, which ultimately will help break down stereotypes.
And I know that you kind of like have like a little bit of like you've dipped your like feet in this, right, Justin? Because like University of St. Thomas, they either have an esports team or they're getting esports teams.
Yeah, we have teams, and we've been recruiting for the next season throughout this past year.
Right, right. So I'm sure like you feel like there's going to be a higher sense of community, especially in your university, considering the fact that you do have esports teams, right? And
Yeah,
oh,
100%. Yeah, I mean, our community, within esports has grown, at an incredible pace. We sat down with an interview with Houston Biz Journal, I believe last week, and our club president basically said that we've had over 150 people join our Discord channel in just under 8 or 9 months, right? And so, I think just, that example alone just goes to show, how quickly, people out there are seeking out these communities in esports, right? And, I know for our university, it's been great to have that. I think it's given an added dynamic to our university, and something that continues to set us apart from our peers, especially here in the greater Houston area. And I think that's something that's really cool that our students are doing without them even knowing or even realizing it. It's breaking those stereotypes, right? And I'm very excited for our students to continue to do that. For example, almost every one of the kids who I've recruited this year, they all ask, "Hey, is there a gym or a workout facility where we can work out at?" Right? Which, obviously the stereotype is that these gamers just sit at their PC for hours and don't really go outside, right? And you know, almost every kid that's going to be coming here to play on our varsity team is, they want somewhere to work out, right? We've connected with our athletic department. We're going to have nutritionists for our team, and so, you know, I think that, in essence, what I'm saying is, I think, you mentioned a cultural shift, right, T? I think that was what sort
Yeah.
of sparked this conversation. And I think that, at least from a collegiate perspective, that has already happened, and it's continuing to happen. These aren't just kids coming to play games and, waste their 4 years, and right. We're going to hold them. We're going to hold them to a GPA standard. We're going to make sure they have regular workout regimens. So these are full-fledged student athletes, right? So the age-old adage that, these kids are just going to be distracted and, wasting their time, that's gone. These kids are getting a quality education. They're going to be in great shape, and they're going to represent our university at the highest level that collegiate video games can offer. And I think that's, a huge cultural shift that I've been really excited to see from the collegiate side of things.
Yeah, because we see things pushing on, right? We see things like that are like way different now than they were like way back when in the 90s and the early 2000s, to where like, now we're in a position as a video game community to where we can, protect multiple cultures, right? And make sure that, they're not subject to certain things, or we can like connect with multiple communities way easier. Like, we're already like at a pretty good standard, but how do we hold ourselves to a higher standard? Tony?
Mhm. I mean, I really think it just comes down to doing some basics, which is just acknowledging that people are multidimensional, people are different. And I think that a lot of that is going to come to pass because historically, like games have never been easier to develop or get into, consume, and play. All of the costs that was there before, all of the technology barriers that were there before, they're not. And so I think as long as we continue to make spaces for this stuff to occur, and honestly, it's just going to happen because as more people grow older, as people explore, it's just going to become a richer and richer kind of ecosystem. And with more people within that ecosystem, it's really hard to argue that everybody should be this, right? I think that's really what it comes down to. So it's like the individual being open, people in the maybe on the outskirts or that aren't maybe a part of the gaming community starting to understanding to see that it's something that's easy to jump into, just like watching sports on the weekend is not that difficult, right? Like, yeah, you got to learn some rules, you got to know what's going on, but it's not that crazy. The barriers aren't there. And so I think if we just continue to do what we're doing and make space for people, show them and represent them as whole people, that's probably the start that'll help everything else kind of roll downhill.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tony, I think you had a great point that diversity will encourage diversity. So just starting there, if you're a new kid at school and you walk in and you're trying to figure out where to go at lunch, and there's a table that has just a diverse group of kids, that's going to be the one you're comfortable going to just easily. And the more diverse that that we gaming is diverse, but the more diverse that it's represented as, the more comfortable people will be going there. And before we get too far off of this point, I did also want to mention that a mistake I definitely made early on was stereotyping people by console or preferred gaming platform, right? And that can be a really huge boundary or threshold for those who want to participate with their community members, because it's not the cheapest. These games, they're awesome and free to play, but to play them on a PC or a console, those can be hundreds and hundreds of dollars. And I think one great one is mobile gaming. Most people do have a mobile, they have their cell phone, and they can participate in these awesome mobile games. I mean, just think of, League, they have Wild Rift. These really diverse. About that. We've got fire alarm testing going in my building. But having these mobile games be available to people, that can really help break down boundaries and allow for a much more diverse and inclusive environment naturally, even for those who may not can afford the more expensive consoles.
I think another thing is like as gamers, it's like we ourselves need to like encourage positive habits. So, for example, one little mantra I like to think of is teasing, not taunting. So it's like you can like talk shit and like tease your friends, but it's like don't go into the territory of taunting and like trying to make people leave and trying to make people feel bad. It's like when the laughter stops, you ought to stop, that sort of thing.
Okay. Because I was gonna say, like, how thin of a line is that? Like.
Yeah. It's like I'm not saying don't have fun. I'm just saying like don't make it weird. Don't become a big weird bully. Don't make anyone walk away feeling bad.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, like, I definitely I definitely talk shit to the homies, but it's just like,
Oh yeah.
because like especially like in the FGC, like it's a thing to where like we're trying to like just get a rise out of somebody, and we're just trying to like we're super competitive and stuff like that. But yeah, once you like start like talking about somebody's mom, it's just like, all right, bro, like I just missed the combo. You don't have to do this. Like, so I totally like get it. And I like, that's a really thin line. So I was just like,
yeah, I guess it's like keeping it on the side of a quick clowning on them and not making it personal.
Oh, okay. See,
Yes.
I understand this way better now. Okay.
Just a quick quip. But, and I mean, also like focusing on the excitement of doing well, as opposed to like anger of doing poorly or seeing someone else doing poorly, and maybe thinking of those moments as like maybe after a session, like is this a friend who's new to the game? Is it just someone having an off day? Like what's going on there? Instead of like getting mad and reactionary. Like I was saying with the emotional intelligence stuff earlier, like recognizing those feelings in yourself and recognizing that border between we're still all having fun and experiencing a healthy range of up and down emotions versus like I'm actually pissed now and I'm actually reconsidering my friendships. Like at that point, it's like maybe you should step back and you are the one who's sort of encouraging a negative environment.
Yeah, because that's also something that's been like really huge, like during the pandemic, because like I would play like Among Us like a lot, and it's just like when like I was like playing that game, it was just like, are we gonna like because that's a game to where we're like, all right, we're just trying to like figure out and get information from each other, but like where do you draw the line when you like try to get answers, or where do you get too into the game, like that, like stuff like that is like is like, as gamers, we just got to take responsibility and be like, okay, bro, like you need to know when enough is enough. So I mean,
Yeah, to your point, just real quick with Among Us, I always thought that game was funny, especially playing with your friends, because they would yell. At least in my experience, they would yell like, "You're such
yeah,
a
bro.
liar, you're lying," and I'm like,
Yeah,
well,
bro, like stuff like that.
I'm like, well, isn't that the point of the game? is to lie? So that was always what I thought was funny when those fights would break out, and I'm like, if we're getting mad, why are we even playing this game? But I
See?
digress. But one stereotype that I actually do want to address, and this goes back to Renee's point, that is true, that I hope was changed, is the toxicity, I think, in in the chat of games, and he kind of made the joke like back in Modern Warfare lobbies, what back in like 2008, 2009, where it started even to this day in 2021 in League of Legends all chat or even your team chat, how you can get flamed. And one thing that I think, at least in my experience, that it's very easy to have happen is for people to point the finger in matches and say one person sucks versus another person and how like what they did wrong, but you hardly ever see any praise given. And even one step further, you hardly ever see players actually reach out to a player and say, hey, you are really good at this champion or at this maneuver or for T in your world with this champion and this combo, right? Can you teach me like how you learn that combo? Or hey, could you and I do some practice? Like, could we one versus each other and learn some things? And I think that really, I don't want to say this, because I don't really know this for a fact, but I imagine in North America we struggle with that more than other regions, which I think could also contribute to why we lack to reach our potential in international competition, right? Like I think in China, and I've actually even seen it with MSI with League of Legends, when they're playing against these people in the Europe West server, is like the people from Korea, who's arguably the best team in the world for League of Legends, will reach out to some of these players and say, "Hey, you're really good at this champion. Can you teach me?" Or like, "Hey, like what runes were you using with this champion? How can I use the champion like you do?" Right? Whereas here in North America, if we got our butt kicked, we would just try and flame them and like, make enemies. And so
You're bad. Like,
yeah, you're like you're not
how do
even.
you even do this? Like,
Yeah, you're not even good, kid. Like, why are you typing? But in your back of head, like, I'm getting my butt kicked right now, right? So I do hope that a stereotype that can change, and I hope to play my part, is that as a region that we give more props where props are due and seek to learn as opposed to seek to putting someone down just because they're good, right? So
Well,
that's
or
I
something
think
I
that
wanted to put out there.
I think that that's a big thing. I've noticed that too. I think it's something that also comes out of looking at something as a game versus a sport.
yes,
At least in America, I cannot speak to anywhere else at all. But in America, if you're playing a sport, you have to be like a sport about it. Like
yeah.
there's almost like this connected responsibility that if nobody else is looking at you, there's no one in the room, and nobody reports you. Nobody needs to do any of that. It's kind of baked in because that's the culture around the sport. And so I think if we can elevate esports to have the culture of those values, that are important, and have those values be seen in top players and projected as a model for other people to kind of
Yeah.
adopt, then that's kind of the good thing. But I
Sportsmanship in
definitely,
general, right?
yeah, it's
Just
sportsmanship in general. And a lot of sports, honestly, I mean, you couldn't be super competitive in some of these games because they kept changing. So it's like that's changing now, right? Like
yeah.
they're actually hanging out long enough for you to really care how you're seen in these games versus just crush or win, right? Like, so I think that's a big change.
So before we take questions from the attendees, right? Where do we go from here? Like we pretty much gone through like, we touched on how we can, start to protect some of the cultures in gaming, how we can just change it in general. So where do we go from here?
I think where we go is first, with us being panelists, definitely following through with everything we talked about, right? Like the practice what you preach thing. Um, but I think, what we can do, as a community, is just again, I guess like we can only speak for ourselves, and I'll just speak for myself here. Is something I've been trying to do is actually, when people put me in the box, like just for example, the other day I was out with friends, and I had someone said that they described to one of their friends about me that how I was like, I was a gamer nerd because I was the director of esports, right? And in a nice way, I kind of challenged that, and I was like, why was that the reason? Why was that why you described like me like that? So not because I was ashamed, but I'm like, there's a lot of other qualities about me, right? That I think you could better describe me as. You could describe me as something completely different but that's just my occupation, right? Like, why did you default
Right.
to that? And so what I think we can do as panelists, and maybe this can be people who are also watching this out in the community, is don't be afraid to, not be ashamed, but also challenge people and challenge them on their stereotypical perceptions and ask them, hey, why is that how you perceive me, or why do you perceive gamers that way? And just seek to understand as opposed to getting mad, right? And then
Yeah.
once you understand why, then maybe try to paint a better picture and say, hey, this is just to be quite transparent. This is how I felt when you kind of had this viewpoint. And here's how I maybe think you should approach it, or here's how I would like to be perceived, as opposed to you just thinking I'm a gamer. So
Yeah.
that's where I think we go, is just again, seek to understand and challenge these stereotypical viewpoints we might come across.
Yeah, because a lot of our panelists are in the industry. So if you guys could speak to your coworkers, if you could speak to the industry, like, what do we need? What does the industry need right now to try to dispel these stereotypes?
Well, I definitely think we need some allyship, like Justin was mentioning, being able to speak up. But not only speaking up for yourselves, but those who are underrepresented and perhaps misunderstood around you.
Right.
And finding the bravery to speak up to those who may have respect for, or, might look up to you. Finding the bravery to speak out either way, especially when you're in a privileged position where you can safely and comfortably speak about these things. And there are some companies that are really working towards this. AnyKey comes to mind. They have their Good Luck Have Fun pledge, which
Yes.
you take that, it publicly shows that on your Twitch handle. That's a really great and passive way to show some support for kind of changing the narrative around gaming. But I definitely think that it needs to start with us speaking up for those who don't have quite the privilege of the voice that we may have.
Right.
I mean, at a macro level, I mean, I'll go back to, what I said earlier about the industry having the bigger stakeholders in the industry being able to push, in these areas, right? It's what we've seen in other examples. So the industry may just be at a bit of an inflection point where we need to take on some of the best practices others have seen, right? So if you take my industry and the consulting and accounting field, like 30 years ago, there wasn't enough women in our workforce, and we made steps to make sure there were more women in the workforce. And now we're still pushing on, okay, they're in the workforce, but they're not quite getting promoted to the same levels as the men, right? And then now we're like, hey, wait a minute, we did 30 years of work on women, but there's not a lot of people of color around here either. Well, what do we do about that, right? And so,
Right.
and there's these decisions, right, at every point, whether it's where you recruit for talent. In our industry here might be, who's playing the games and the advertisements, right? Are they a diverse group of people that then when kids go to buy that game, like, hey, that looks like me, I could play that game, like there's all these sort of levels of these things that can happen, but the industry has to be really thoughtful about it. And again, I just, it starts with the larger, to me, it starts with all of us. And I love the idea of sort of grounds up, but also the bigger changes will come when the largest participants sort of make it formal, because they have the resources to put behind it, right?
Exactly.
In terms of people and money and those sort of things, to make it really visible.
All right.
I think. Oh, sorry. Do we have time for one?
No, go for it. Go for it.
No,
It's okay.
I think like an important thing that I like to tell people, and that I try to do as much as I can, is like, if there is like an issue or like a demographic or a stereotype or just something you don't know or don't understand or you've never heard of and you don't know what are the nuances around it. Like, I don't mean this in a weird way. I mean this in the kindest way possible. You can Google it. It's like,
Right.
don't put the burden on the people around you and just like potentially opening old wounds out of your potentially morbid curiosity. But it's like, if there's something you're wondering about, just Google it first before seeing if you're about to embark on a really uncomfortable discussion at lunchtime with your coworkers or something,
Right.
So that sort of thing. And I think also like keeping an open mind and an open ear, like when there's like, so for example, like a few years ago, there was like more people who specialized in doing accessibility reviews of games, and game studios started hiring those people in order to get their expertise and to actually improve their games, like while in development, instead of trying to tack something on in the end or just not having these accessibility options. So that's an example of, like, if you don't know something, listen, Google it, and then if you're in a position to hire an expert.
Hire an expert, right? But before we wrap up today, we've got a couple of Q&A. So Michael Jackson, that's his real name, he asks, how has the potential for gaming careers shifted the culture? I never thought of being a professional gamer when I was a kid, but now this is a possibility. Big same on that one. So I feel the exact same way.
I would say that it's a really broad industry that even if that's your passion and you love playing games and that's the route for you, awesome. But there's a lot of different avenues that you can get into games that aren't specifically being a play or even an artist. You can be a designer if you code. So there's lots of, and even production, helping the project, move along, helping the team, move forward and prioritize all those different things. It's much bigger than folks would initially think. And I hope that more and more of that understanding, awareness, opportunities, and knowledge start to get out, the more that this is seen as a accepted just cultural medium,
Yeah. All right. So we got a second question from Bryant Chan. He asks, as esports are becoming more popular, how can we build more gender diversity there?
That's a little bit tough. It takes initial interest, and Renee and I have talked about this before, that it's unfortunate, but we have to kind of carve these spaces out. If you think professional gamers, we have to kind of carve these spaces out for women to practice their competitive gaming. It's not something that they tend to have much space in, and they can't really improve at the same speed because they don't get these tournaments. They don't get the LAN experience that their counterparts make. So starting from the ground up, friendlier lobbies, taking ownership over your words, and not just being hateful to people who aren't like you in lobbies.
Right.
It's a great first step. And the second one is seeing these tournaments, in talking competitive specifically here, that women are encouraged to join and play. I know they do get a lot of backlash, but they're really important. And the more that we see them, the more that we'll start seeing more co-ed opportunities once we get that diversity in the scene.
Okay. So Harvin Moore asks, Duolingo has become a unicorn and the largest provider of foreign language education in the world through gamification. What do you think are the most promising business cases for gamification of traditional industries? I didn't even know that was a word, gamification. Wow.
It is.
So can you read that question again for me real quick?
I said, Duolingo has become a unicorn and the largest provider of foreign language education in the world through gamification. What do you think are the most promising business cases for gamification of traditional industries?
I'm gonna, Tony, unless you want to take this.
You can take a step at it.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm hearing it right, like Duolingo, I'm not sure if that means like bilingual or things
It's
having
an
like
app.
multiple.
No, it's an app.
Oh, it's an
Duolingo-
app?
Yeah,
Oh,
Duolingo is an app.
Oh, then Tony, take it. I've never heard of the app, so go ahead.
You want to jump in on this one, Renee?
Yeah, because I've previously worked in educational games, so I know a smidgen. But I don't know. I think perhaps people don't approach gamification from the right angle, and that's the main issue. So it's not like there's just money being left on the table, no one's picking it up. It's not like that's not really the situation. The situation is more that games kind of are dependent on a sense of play, like a sense of getting into flow, a sense of like desire and wanting to do this thing. So it's like people want to learn a language, and that is why Duolingo is helpful, is because it's like they have the desire, and then once they get through the door, then it's like something fun and motivating. People exercise because once they get out the door, they feel the endorphins and they feel their body is healthier and improving and getting stronger. So it's just like, in order to successfully gamify something, it has to be something that is worthwhile to the player, that there is a sense of play, that there's motivation, and it's not just a weird sort of superficial, you've done this rudimentary painful task and now you get a faux currency coin. Like that's not gamification, that's not anything. So it's just like actually imbuing the thing with fun.
Yeah, I think most people, when they say gamification, basically mean a reward system, and that is like one half of one letter in the alphabet of game design, right? So gamification is really just fucking pointification. Like it's exactly what Renee is talking about, which is arbitrary progression checks to give you some sense of you've accomplished a thing. But if at your core, there's no connection, meaning, it doesn't move you emotionally, it doesn't move you in terms of like feeling like an investment of your skill has made it grow or something like that, then it's not going to really do it. So what we really need to be thinking about is taking lessons from maybe games as a service, where in those arenas, a new space, place that you can do things in is introduced in a progressive way so that you can actually understand what you're getting into and feel more confident at every step. But it's not because you got 10 Tony bucks. You know, it's not because we just made up some random badge or currency. It's because you actually care. So that's one of the big things that I would leave on when it comes to gamification.
I think maybe another source of inspiration would be tangential, I think that's the term, tangential learning moments. So for example, like when I've done some teaching, like I've met kids who learned about, say, the Renaissance because they played Assassin's Creed. So it's like those kind of moments where you're doing something fun, but there's also a real world learning example is in it.
Yeah, there's some good applications, I suppose, in like some of the, corporate training and some other things that just fall along with the education examples. But I agree with Tony, the marketing world, no offense to the marketing world in general, but man, they have sort of used gamification as a term for like, just every little thing they try to do that, makes it look like you're getting a promotion. That's not just me giving you a promotion. I got to do something to get it. And that's not gamification. I mean, gamification is, Duolingo is a good example. I think there's probably good examples in like fitness, right? That have been, done over the years and sort of making it seem like you're progressing towards something and making it more incentivizing to do stuff. But yeah, it's become sort of a bastardized term, unfortunately.
I think education has a lot of potential for this, to if I'm being honest, but not necessarily how to consume one piece of content or course. I think more so, if you think about what's really interesting and engaging about games, is that they put you at the center and you kind of get immediately sucked in which way you want, right? And I think that, like, even if you just think about the college experience, having somebody who's been from kindergarten to 12 on rails suddenly now go on a quest to make their own choices feels like a pretty good parallel for what you're about to get into, if somebody would just frame it that way for you, if somebody would give you the real anchors to a lot of those experiences that you're going to have in a meaningful way. I think that could be huge for retention, making sure that they feel connected and supported the whole way through and complete whatever challenge they face, right? That's a different approach, but something that I could probably get behind, right?
Right. Well, that is all the time we have for Q&A, and actually all the time we have for the Pwning Noobs Dispelling Video Game Stereotypes panel. So I'm hope everybody definitely got an earful today. There is a lot of things that we can do in the industry and as gamers to help dispel, video game stereotypes in general. And like I said at the beginning, at the top of the podcast, the world of video gaming is evolving. So as gamers, it is our responsibility to make sure that we evolve with it. And that's from the industry level, from all the way to the top and all the way to the level that is, gaming and gamers as general. So thank you guys so much for joining me. I had fun. This is very engaging conversation. Thank you guys so much for being here with us, man.
Thank you
Thanks
so
for hosting,
much.
Banjo.
Yep, thanks, T.
You're very welcome. So if that's everybody, then I'm gonna go ahead and close her out. And yeah, you guys have a very, very nice day and enjoy the rest of the Houston Tech Rodeo. We got plenty of panels coming up for the rest of the week. So you guys enjoy, and I'm very happy that you guys were able to join us.